For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates. This is StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh, Revi, and on our flagship weekly show, The Talking Point, we're looking at the crisis in Kazakhstan, its implications for the country, the region, and the world. A warm welcome to all our viewers who are joining this live stream, and a welcome to those viewers who will pick this live stream up later on our YouTube channel. We are joined for the first time from Prague by a guest on StratNews Global, an expert, a journalist from Kazakhstan, Aigerim Toleukhanova. Beg your pardon for the pronunciation, Aigerim, but thank you so much for giving us time.
Thanks for having me.
And a known face on Indian channels, both digital and on television broadcast and in the written medium as well, Ambassador Asoke Mukerji. He's India's ex-envoy to Kazakhstan. He's been India's permanent representative to the UN as well. And he was also the man who opened India's first Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan embassies in 1992, soon after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Ambassador, thank you again for your time. I do know today has actually been very busy for you otherwise.
No, thank you, Amitabh, and I'm very happy that I'm able to join you for this discussion with Aigerim. Thank you.
Aigerim, straight away, I mean, we've seen another address to the nation. I don't know who's actually watching that because the internet is down. I'm not sure about broadcast networks in the country by President Tokayev, where he's alarmingly ordered or warned protesters that he's ordered security forces to fire without warning. Now, what is the situation that you can piece together on the ground, knowing that it's so difficult to, in fact, get in touch with anybody, your colleagues, or even your family?
I was actually able to talk to some people on the ground briefly because the internet is still not there and the calling from mobile is very expensive. But I've heard from people that they're really scared because they constantly hear shootings and the sounds of grenades. And I've heard that some of the people saw casualties, unfortunately, and some people saw how a group of aggressive men would distribute guns, for example. And from what I've talked to different people, they all separate peaceful protesters from this group of criminals, I would say. And I don't know if they are terrorists, as President Tokayev says, but definitely the nationwide peaceful protest has been somehow hijacked by this group of people. And right now, the situation is so messy, as in geopolitical stuff and this terrorist stuff and national peaceful protest, that I don't really know what's going to happen even in the next few hours.
Ambassador, I mean, next few hours, we've seen what's happened in the previous 24 hours or so when the CSTO, the Russian-led military alliance, was for the first time called into a member country, and troops have already been deployed. So many questions there. Now, one is, of course, what President Tokayev has warned. Now, he's trying to clamp down. Do you think that will work? Is it a question of whether the local security forces are not united? How will the CSTO troops behave? Is there, a mode of engagement that they will follow? Are they also allowed to fire without warning? I mean, there's so many questions that we don't have no answers for.
Well, Amitabh, I think to address the point of the CSTO, this is the first time that the CSTO has deployed what they call peacekeepers, troops on the ground. Not all the countries are there with troops. I think Kyrgyzstan is to take a decision tomorrow probably on whether to send humanitarian peacekeepers or troops. So that's the deployment, and since it's the first time, we really don't know what their standard operating procedures are. But if they follow the peacekeeping model of the United Nations, then they are to keep the peace between the two sides who are involved in this violent conflict. They are not supposed to be party on behalf of one side against the other side. But it's early. We don't know whether that will actually happen on the ground or not. And therefore, that is an operational thing that only time will tell what will happen. The other part is that the CSTO was formed in 1992, a long time ago, but it has never been visible until the crisis in Kazakhstan. And in terms of the CSTO itself, it is a collective security organization built on the pattern of NATO. Of course, it can't be compared with NATO because NATO is much larger and more visible. But this is the first time that we are seeing a collective security organization in Eurasia. And that has implications for not only the countries involved in the CSTO, but also countries in the Eurasian landmass, because this is the first time this has happened. So I think that people will watch as to how the CSTO works on the ground and what actually happens because of the CSTO or despite the CSTO. So that is one part. And the other part of your question regarding the violence and what has happened, and I really, what Aigerim has said is actually what I have heard from my friends as well, that there were peaceful protests all across the country, and suddenly these seem to have been hijacked by people with arms and with violence, and therefore it needs to be seen as to which kind of people these are. And I think that we'll have to wait to see when they get information about these people, whether the government of Kazakhstan or people who are on the field through the CSTO will provide this information to the larger international community as to where these people came from, who are these people, who armed them, and so on. Because this is a part of a pattern in our part of Asia. We are used to it by now because of the cockpit of terrorism in the Afghanistan-Pakistan context. But to have it seen in this term in Kazakhstan, it's the first time that we are seeing it. So I think that if there's a linkage with broader groups or organizations, that will have to be explained and seen and assessed.
Sure. There's been no evidence, both from the Kazakh government, the president saying that, as Aigerim was pointing out, the international terrorists back from abroad or trained abroad. Any further information on that? I know it's speculative at this moment, Aigerim, but could you also just explain to our viewers here, many of them who wouldn't know the nuances of what's happening in Kazakhstan, of how these protests started, what was the reason for them, and how they enlarged into more of a anti-government, anti-Nazarbayev, anti-government, even economic prosperity not trickling down kind of thing?
I think that in general, protests in Kazakhstan have always had their own peculiarities. There is no unified force behind, like opposition force behind these protesters, and there are very random, not really, I wouldn't say coordinated, but the people in general have various demands. Some of them demand just increase in their salaries. Some of them demand government regulation on certain prices. Most of the protesters would say shalket, which is from Kazakh means old men go away, referring to ex-President Nazarbayev. And the protests initially started on Sunday, January 2nd, in the western city of Zhanaozen. This part of Kazakhstan is oil and gas rich, but also it's the part of the country which has seen the most inequality, because for decades they have been extracting all these resources from the country, but local population haven't benefited from them much. And if those who followed Kazakhstan in the past couple of years, there have been very frequent protests of oil workers, for example, and other workers in this extraction industry, asking to raise their salaries, to improve working conditions, and in general, improve the economic situation. So I think that demands in this current protests were mixed, and it's hard to say exactly what is the main thing that they want. It's a combination of things because there have been so many problems accumulating for the past few decades and they haven't been addressed properly. And I would say the authorities didn't hear properly the activists and peaceful protesters about their grievances. And Kazakhstan, as authoritarian state, also detained activists in advance and arrested them. And I also wanted to note that Kazakhstan frequently uses the article in Criminal Code of Extremism and Terrorism and actually jails activists under this article. So we must be careful to call these people terrorists, as official lines are saying right now. And as previously was mentioned, we really need to investigate and wait what information will be given to us. And I don't know if there will be a lot of information given to us by the government, because usually they give only some portion of information and there is no comprehensive analysis about the events that are shattering Kazakhstan.
Lots happening within Russia, Ambassador, and on Russia's different borders. Next week, they'll be discussing with the Americans and then NATO and OSCE about Ukraine as well. But just a question here from Makaran Joshi, who says, do you think Russia is trying to regain a tight grip on the country like in the Soviet era by sending its quote-unquote peacekeepers? And since you're talking about the Soviet era, I was reading somewhere that population in Kazakhstan, maybe up to 50% wasn't even born during the Soviet era. So they don't really know what was the historical significance of it, right? But Ambassador, yeah.
Well, I think that the question about Russia's influence or ability in Kazakhstan will actually is not so simple to answer, because if you look at it in terms of Kazakhstan as a country, it follows a multi-vector policy. And its largest and biggest trading partner is the European Union, followed by China, and then by Russia. So in economic terms, the European Union and China are far bigger players for Kazakhstan than Russia. And in specific terms for the oil industry, I have been myself, we have an oil field off the Caspian at Satpayev, and we know the huge influence that multinational companies like Chevron of the United States have in that region of the Caspian of Kazakhstan, including where these protests have taken place because of inequalities of economic growth and development. So it's not like the Soviet era that you could only go to one source of influence and say that this is how it will work out. Today, there are multiple sources. And I think that that's something that we need to keep in mind. The other part of what you asked me about the role of Russia and its talks with the United States and so on, from what I know, I don't think the situation in Kazakhstan did feature in these talks between Russia and the United States. They have focused on Ukraine, of course, but not on Kazakhstan. So this is a new area. And I don't know how this issue will, if it comes onto the agenda between Russia and the United States, how exactly it will play out, because the United States is a strong partner of Kazakhstan as well, especially in the World Trade Organization. They supported the accession of Kazakhstan in 2015. They supported Kazakhstan's bid to host the ministerial conference, which is the highest level meeting of the World Trade Organization, which was to have been held last year, but was postponed because of COVID. So, and they have very strong linkages with the elites in Kazakhstan, which I've seen myself when I was ambassador in Kazakhstan. The United States is a very big influence in the corridors of power in Kazakhstan. So I think that we need to keep this multi-vector paradigm in front of us when looking at whether this will bring back the old days of the Soviet period or not. I don't think that that holds any true any longer. It's a new world out there now.
In fact, you answered Shubham Sharma's next question, Ambassador. How much influence does the US have in Kazakhstan? Maybe you weren't talking about influence. You were talking about the geopolitical connect, right? And also, what both of you have talked in your previous answers, is this an internal rebellion or an externally ignited one, as we have seen in other countries? Again, a couple of things that our viewers want to know here in India. Rekha Pai, who says she thinks that the protests will be crushed now that the Russians and the CSTO are in, but the underlying problems remain. And Chinmay Phadke, who asks, is this a Tahrir Square a moment for Kazakhstan? Is it too early to answer either of those two questions, Aigerim?
I think the one definitive answer would be that Kazakhstan will not be the same as it was just last week. And for many people who were apolitical before, they all talk about politics now and different political games. And from what I've heard from people in Almaty, at least, they were all kind of felt betrayed, because all these days when the crucial support was needed from the government, from police to restore order, there was no one in the streets. The streets were openly being robbed, windows broken, the looters were freely walking on the street. And it was shocking to see, and many people say that they don't feel safe anymore. And I don't know how it will develop further, but I think if we can see the President Tokayev's address to the nation today, he said that he will really be harsh. And right now there is no kind of separation, who is protester, who is terrorist, who is who, and they will shoot without warning at everyone. And I expect that there might be a further crackdown on civil society, on people's freedom and their human rights. And I don't know if it will evolve into another political or just any kind of civil society crisis. It's still hard to say, but I know that people, at least more and more people, are becoming aware of the political developments in Kazakhstan, because even just 5 years ago, among many of my friends who enjoyed prosperous life in Kazakhstan, where they could go abroad or buy some luxury clothes, even they start to talk now about the distribution of wealth, about the different political behavior of certain officials, and they also start to voice their concerns and their anger. And I think that the government doesn't follow up on time with all these concerns from the people. They still keep doing the same thing that they used to do for the last decade. And I think it's not working anymore. And people really, those people who went on the streets to protest peacefully, I think they really want to have some change, and the government should listen to them.
Ambassador, another question on Russia, since you served both in the then Soviet Union and Russia, and then the Central Asian republics when they were under the Soviet Union and post that. In terms of recent history, say from 2014, there is analysis that Russia and President Putin want to see a resurgent Russia going back to the Soviet times. So whether you look at Crimea and Ukraine, Georgia, Belarus, the next Ukraine episode, which is currently ongoing, and now the opportunity for Russian troops led by Russian troops in the CSTO to be in Kazakhstan. Does it enlarge their, President Putin's grasp, so as to speak?
Well, Amitabh, that question also must take into account the capacity of Russia today. Russia is not the Soviet Union. And in terms of population, it is much smaller. It's 140 million people. In terms of projection of power, it has chosen where to project power, but has also chosen where not to project power. So it's a different situation. There is no ideological connect, which there was in the Soviet times. That was all under communism. Today, none of these countries have a communist ideology which links them. So I think that we need to look at this question of what you asked me in terms of spheres of influence. That probably is one way of looking at it. I know analysts in India have written about spheres of influence coming back, and that's part of a multipolar world in which each pole will have a sphere of influence. But I don't think that what's happening in Kazakhstan actually falls into this sphere of influence for one or two reasons. One is that Kazakhstan is a very unique country. It has 100 nationalities. It's very, very cosmopolitan and very, very integrated. I mean, it's not a country in which you have a minority which is under constant threat of being, expunged or obliterated. You have a coexistence of everybody. And I think that from the time I have been living or visiting Kazakhstan, I've noticed that you have all kinds of people. Of course, it's a fact that the Kazakh people, I mean, they have grown from 1991, when there were only about 16 million. They've grown in numbers, and that's natural. It has set right many of the things that happened during the Soviet times, where the Kazakh people themselves were victimized. So they are, in that sense, a large population. But there is a significant minority from other parts of the former Soviet Union as well. Not only Russia. Russia, of course, as your map says, has 20%, but even from the Caucasus. I have friends in Almaty who are from Chechnya, and they live in Kazakhstan. So they were all brought there during Stalin's time, and that's how they have lived and they have grown up in this country. So I think it belongs to everybody. And I think that that's the point that probably needs to be kept in mind when talking of this, recreation of the Soviet Union, or some attempt to recreate the Soviet Union. It's not exactly the same. It's 30 years ago, it was a different situation. Today, it's a different situation. There are people on the ground who were not born 30 years ago, most of them.
That's me.
True. Okay, so you let out a secret and your age there, Aigerim. But in terms of Kazakhstan, how do you and the people in Kazakhstan, or can you analyze how they feel about Russian troops and the CSTO troops in Kazakhstan? Because, like you said, Kazakhstan is not going to be the same again after what's been happening this year. But over the years, it's been seen as balancing very adeptly, whether it's the US and the West, whether it's China, whether it's Russia, whether it's other countries like regional powers like India who want to have ties. But with the Russian-led troops there now, has that also changed?
I think it depends, because there are many groups in Kazakhstan, different groups that think different way. There are groups that support any Russian intervention and actually want to be part of Russia. Some groups, they view Russia as their friend, strategic partner. Some groups view Russia as a threat and enemy, and they would never want to be under Russian so-called occupation. And some, I think, they are just so scared that they wouldn't mind that anyone who can restore peace and control would come. They wouldn't mind them coming. And I've seen some photos from yesterday's protest that there were some activists with banners saying that we do not want a CSTO intervention. But some of the people I've spoken to, they just say that they're so scared and they want to restore the order as fast as possible, because it's been really surreal to hear shooting for several days from their apartments, and some people, they can't even get food because all the stores are robbed, and they're afraid to even get the trash out or something like that. Some people started to bake their own bread because they can't buy it anywhere. All the basic products at least yesterday, were missing, like eggs, bread, and other stuff. So it really depends, and I think that some people really are desperate just to keep things get back to normality. Some people still want to push for change no matter what. Some people just want to peacefully protest, and yeah, there are many groups, and I can't say that there is one unified and very like mainstream view of what it is for the Kazakhstanis about the CSTO troops.
Understandable. Ambassador, we've talked about the West, we've talked about Russia. 4 words here which form a question by Rekha Pai. Should China be worried? Could you give that a little bit of context as well for our viewers who don't know about the footprint in Kazakhstan and in Central Asia in general?
Well, I have lived through this period from 1990 onwards, when I first went and worked in Central Asia until till I came back. And when I went in 1990, China was not there. China came into Central Asia after 2002, after it resolved its border problems with the 3 Central Asian states, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. So after that, China's presence in Central Asia and in Kazakhstan has been phenomenal. It has overcome the handicap of not having been there when the United States and then Turkey, these were the first 2 big foreign partners of Central Asia and of Kazakhstan. So it's caught up with both of them, and it's gone beyond. And I think that one thing that China has done is integrated Kazakhstan and Central Asia into the space for building its Belt and Road Initiative. The east-west highways, transportation, rail transportation, gas pipelines, everything that China has constructed goes through this space. So, of course, China will be worried about what is happening in Kazakhstan. And I think that in President Tokayev's press statement or interview today, he has thanked China along with Turkey and Uzbekistan for coming to the assistance of Kazakhstan. And I think that that's a very interesting group of 3 countries, which he has specifically mentioned, because China has its economic involvement, and the Foreign Office spokesman yesterday has said that what is happening in Kazakhstan is an internal matter for Kazakhstan and to be resolved by Kazakhstan. Very ironically, a similar statement came from the Taliban in Kabul, who also said the same thing.
Yeah.
But
Who would have thought 6 months back that the Taliban
Yeah,
would be commenting on a situation in Kazakhstan?
Yeah, and calling for dialogue. I mean, they themselves don't encourage a dialogue in their own country, but that's a separate issue. I think that the reference to Turkey and Uzbekistan may be a pointer to what may be happening on the ground, because Uzbekistan and Turkey have been very active in the last 3 years in this whole process of creating a Turkic union, which now exists, in expanding a Turkic footprint in Central Asia. And therefore, for them to be mentioned in a statement issued, spoken today by the President of Kazakhstan is, I think, something that your viewers should keep track of. And I mention it because Uzbekistan, since the new president took over, has become a kind of dynamo in the region for regional integration, a role that earlier was played by Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan was the country which kept encouraging regional integration. Now it is Uzbekistan which is trying to assume leadership of this process. Now, if the situation on the ground has to be peacefully resolved, you need the cooperation of all the neighbors of Kazakhstan as well. And that includes Uzbekistan, with which Kazakhstan has had and Uzbekistan has had, they have not had the best of relations for a very long time. I mean, ever since their independence, more or less. So how does this play out is something I'd like to see.
Aigerim, if you want to talk about China, because I think I was reading a poll of some sorts, I'm not sure how reputable it was, that China is not looked upon very favorably in Kazakhstan and Central Asia, and Turkey, if you want to take those 2. And also, when the president says that he's not going to talk to anybody, then how will there be any resolution?
Yeah, I would add some words about China, because what we have seen in the last, I think, 2-3 years is that there have been some anti-Chinese protests in Kazakhstan, and they have been also combined with protests that are connected to the situation in China's western region of Xinjiang, where a lot of ethnic Kazakhs and Uyghurs have left China to Kazakhstan to say what's going on there. And I think that especially after Xinjiang, more local Kazakhs started to become interested in what China is doing and what's going on, and they were very much in solidarity with the protesters about Xinjiang. And right now, I think that we know that there are some little protests going in front of Chinese consulate by a couple of people who just want reunification with their loved ones in Xinjiang. But unfortunately, Kazakh police has been also detaining them and fining with big sums of fines. So you can see that it was it's like another part of peaceful demonstrations as any other demonstrations in Kazakhstan, where authorities, I don't think they want to openly communicate, genuinely communicate with citizens, because I don't know why, but I think they will continue to do so. And that's to your second point, where Tokayev mentioned that there will be no negotiations, because I think he's referring only to the group of these violent men, but there are also people who are voicing their peaceful demands, and some of them maybe become a little bit emotional. And he just said that their grievances are heard, but it doesn't mean that they will be delivered somehow, or some change will be made. So I think it will continue to be like that.
So, but as such, the protests are leaderless, right? I mean, one is because of how they have evolved, and two is because of the authoritarian nature of the government in the past. Like you were saying, they have taken action against dissidents, opposition leaders, anyone who speaks out. There's no clear-cut leadership for these protests. Aigerim.
There are some leaders in certain protests, and I think they're visible in western part of Kazakhstan, where we have seen that some peaceful protests are still going on, where people would just sit in front of some government building and just read poems with Kazakhstan's flag and say that they're against any violence. And I think, at least in my personal view, the kind of solidarity of the people in the western part of Kazakhstan is more intense than in other parts of Kazakhstan, because they all kind of share similar struggles, trying to feed their families, working in these extracting industries and facing low salaries, bad working conditions. And if there are some protests in one city of Western Kazakhstan, usually some workers from another oil company or gas company would join in solidarity. So there is more solidarity in this part of the region than it is in the rest part of the country. So it's all very peculiar and detailed, and there is no one answer to that question.
Ambassador, India's role ties with Central Asia, of course, go back historically and then modern times, and you've been involved in much of that policy making. But of late, there's been a fresh momentum for various reasons. And if I just look at the last 3 months or so, the NSAs of all the 5 Central Asian republics were here for that dialogue with Iran and Russian NSAs and our NSA on Afghanistan. There was a Central Asian foreign ministerial summit, so as to speak, the dialogue that took place in December. And then, of course, reports that have not been made official as yet because of various reasons, that all 5 heads of state have been called for a Republic Day. How do you see, what do you see as India's role, basically, in the current crisis, and does it affect the policies that we were trying to give some momentum to?
Well, I think with Kazakhstan, India's had a very special role, if I may say so. It's been of a different quality. It goes back to 2010, when Kazakhstan decided to step aside and allow India to be elected as a member of the UN Security Council. And then in 2017, India supported Kazakhstan's membership election as part of the Security Council. So we have a very broad multilateral cooperation through the United Nations, on which has been sort of noted. But in terms of bilateral relations too, Kazakhstan today is the largest supplier of uranium for India's nuclear energy program. And that is something that has boosted the figures of bilateral trade between India and Kazakhstan, which were otherwise not as high as they are today. Now, the unrest that is taking place in Kazakhstan is a source of concern for both supplies of uranium from Kazakhstan as well as the price of oil in the global markets, because Kazakhstan is one of the big players in terms of global exports of oil. So, and India is vulnerable on volatile oil prices. So I think in these two specific sectors, there is a concern. And in terms of the political relationship that you mentioned, India and Kazakhstan have not only shared similar perspectives as multi-ethnic societies, multi-linguistic societies, but it's even gone to the extent that today in Lebanon, Indian and Kazakh soldiers are serving together in a UN peacekeeping mission to keep the peace in Lebanon. So we have that kind of synergy with Kazakhstan. And for us, therefore, what is happening in Kazakhstan is very, very important, because that relationship is not replicated with the other Central Asian states. So I think that this is something that's very important, and whether this can be therefore resolved peacefully, keeping in mind all the points that Aigerim has mentioned, I think that's a very important thing that India needs to look at. That how can we play a role, because we are both from Asia. These are also Asian societies. So I know there is a Eurasian dimension, and I know about the old sort of political space of the Soviet Union and so on. But today, in the 21st century, we are both Asian countries. And how do we deal with these issues in Asia? And I mentioned it because Kazakhstan is the host of a very potentially important structure called the SICA, the Conference Building Structure in Asia. That has not been activated, although it should have been activated because it's the counterpart of the OSCE in Europe. And India has people working in the SICA Secretariat. So, we have a relationship with Kazakhstan, which actually can be used by Kazakhstan if they want for trying to bring this situation to a mutually sort of satisfactory solution on the ground. That I think is possible to do.
Aigerim, if you want to just wrap up this discussion, any comments on India and Kazakhstan's relationship, and if that can play any role? And I know it's a difficult question, but where do you see things developing over the next few, I don't know whether to say hours or days?
In terms of India-Kazakhstan relations?
One is that, and overall the situation in Kazakhstan, if you want to just wrap up your thoughts.
Well, to be honest, I don't know much about India-Kazakhstan relations, but I know that for Kazakhstan, I think it's going to be some difficult time, and I hope that partners of Kazakhstan would help with humanitarian or any other kind of support. And I believe that in general, as was mentioned, Kazakhstan has indeed introduced this multi-vector policy and tries to stay friends with everyone without any international escalation. And I believe that it will continue to happen. But it's also important for Kazakhstan to look into internal problems that have been accumulating and were not addressed in a proper manner.
Aigerim, Toleukhanova, absolute pleasure having you for the first time on StratNews Global. I suspect with the situation in Kazakhstan and developing in that region, we'll keep coming back to you for more discussions like this when you're free. Thank you for your time, Aigerim.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed this conversation and have learned a lot.
The pleasure was all ours. And Ambassador, I don't need to say that. All the questions that came in, you had almost preemptively already answered them. So thanks again.
I only wish that what is happening in Kazakhstan, especially in Almaty, was not happening. It's one of the most beautiful cities in the world, and I really hope and pray that everything sorts out quickly, and that nobody is injured, just like that, because it's a real scar on the tissue of humanity, what is happening in Almaty.
So two of our viewers also, thank you. Varun Pratap says, thanks, Ambassador. He's got the name, a typo there. He says Ambassador Mukerji. And Rekha Pai, who also says, thanks, Ambassador and Aigerim. Thank you from our viewers, and thank you from StratNews Global again. Have a good evening and a good almost evening for you, Aigerim, at least in Prague. Thanks again.
Thank you.
And just a reminder to our viewers, I know most of those who stayed on this long at least have subscribed to our YouTube channel, but do help spread the word. Share the link for this video if you've liked it and think other people would like to watch it as well. StratNews Global, as our punchline goes, is your one-stop destination for strategic analysis from an Indian perspective. And some of you have expressed the willingness to help contribute and support us. We've put up a UPI ID, which is there in the YouTube descriptor, and I'm putting it up on the screen again for you right now. Thanks to all our viewers and supporters who have who've been watching this video and keep coming back for more. This is Talking Point on StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh, Revi.